I'm sure most autobiographies are written to set the record straight, to tell the true story and to put right popular misconceptions. Mine is no exception. As you hear my story, I hope you will begin to know and understand me better and see beyond the two-dimensional image created by the Bros fame days. I realise that changing people's perception of me will be a very high water climb, but if this tape helps you to see me and my work, be it music or otherwise, through different eyes, then I'll be happy. This is about the real me. The whole of Terminal 3 at London's Heathrow Airport was in chaos. 3,000 young girls blocked the ramps, the escalators, the whole concourse. The police outriders who were escorting our limo piloted us to the side entrance, and we clambered out. Immediately our 5 burly bodyguards linked arms in a ring around us, and around the seal of their muscular biceps came another ring of 25 policemen. We paused for a moment, a last moment of sanity before the girls spotted where we were. I breathed deeply and psyched myself up, like a runner before a race or an actor before going on stage. Then a scream went up, and the shriek was taken up and sustained by 3,000 adolescent voices. The force of several hundred girls running at speed hit the outer wall of our defences, but they held firm, and slowly but surely we edged through the tide of yelling fans across the terminal to the custom gate. It was October the 23rd, 1988, and the madness and mayhem of Brosmania was at its height. A year earlier, nobody had even heard of us. Yet on that day, as Matt, Craig and I left Britain to start the world tour, we could be forgiven for thinking that every teenage girl in the country was there to see us off. As far as my eyes could see, there were excited, clamouring faces and arms outstretched towards us. Then, just as suddenly as we'd been besieged by them, the fans were cut off from us like we'd made the quantum leap into the comparative calm of the airport departure area. A thick belt of police prevented the madness pursuing us. We were on our way. As we dozed, played video games and watched films on the 27-hour flight, I remember wondering what kind of reception we'd get in Australia. We were on our way to the other side of the world, a place we'd never been to before, where we knew nobody. Perhaps, after the crazy struggle to get to the plane, we'd be disembarking like ordinary passengers, queuing to get through immigration and waiting to pick our bags off the carousel. Perhaps life would be back to normal. But when the plane touched down, before anyone could get off, a posse of airport security men got on. They told us to stay where we were while the rest of the passengers were cleared. Then the steps were wheeled up to the plane, and as we reached the top of them, I was hit by 2 waves. A wave of heat, even though it was only 7:30 in the morning, and a wave of noise as a huge cheer went up from 5,000 fans who were waiting there for us. It took a moment or two for my eyes to focus in the clear, bright light. Below us, at the bottom of the steps on the tarmac, was a line-up of about 150 airport staff waiting to meet us. Held at bay by security men were 50 journalists and photographers, and in the background was a blurred sea of screaming faces. We had travelled 12,000 miles and nothing had changed except the weather. My main emotion was one of excitement and pleasure. We were a pop band. I'd been working hard and planning a pop career since I was 12, and there was no way I wasn't going to be pleased and excited by the success. But there was also a familiar sense of unreality about it all. When we got to our plush Sydney hotel and switched on the television, one of the main items on the news was a film of our arrival. I watched myself coming down the steps of the plane and thought, wow, this is incredible and world famous. But at the back of my mind there was this niggling question. Surely there must be more important things happening in the world to put on the news bulletins. Although we had nearly a year to get used to it, it was a weird feeling getting your head around the kind of adulation and fan worship we encountered everywhere we went. I really had thought that once we got out of Britain, out of our own backyard, we would find ourselves back to normal again. But watching that television news, I knew there was no more normal for me. And there hasn't been. For the last 5 years, I've been on a crazy roller coaster with tremendous highs and terrible lows. I've had no experience of ordinary life. I'm not complaining, I wouldn't change my experiences for anything, but I'd like people to understand just how surreal it has all been. I've been screamed at hysterically by girls of all ages, some as young as 11 and 12. I've been spat at, punched and jeered at, for no reason that I can come close to understanding. Ross has generated adulation and hatred. There's been very little indifference, and even less genuine respect. Yet what have we done? We made some successful records, brought a lot of pleasure to a lot of people. We hurt nobody, certainly never intentionally. Yet the fall from success has been greeted with the gloating glee that is normally reserved for the arrest of a mass murderer. And that has been even harder to get my head around than the scale of suddenness of our success. I hope that by telling this story I'm going to help myself and others come to terms with the strange Bros phenomenon. It was an episode in my life, but not my whole life. There was time pre-Bros and there's going to be a long, productive and successful time post-Bros for both me and my brother Matt. But before I can get on with the next stage, I want to lay to rest some of the myths about Bros. The popular ideas about us that we were a pair of arrogant spendthrifts that ran through millions of pounds on extravagant living, that we ditched our mate Craig from the group, that we were hyped and manufactured group who didn't even perform on our own records, that we quarrelled and split up acrimoniously. Every single one of these ideas is wrong. Let's start at the beginning. We were born on 29th of September 1968, and I'm 11 minutes older than my twin brother Matt. Nobody knew that my mum was expecting twins. She and Dad had chosen 2 names before the birth, Luke Damon for a boy and Rebecca for a girl. My brother's name, Matthew Weston, was chosen hurriedly after he made an unexpected arrival. My mum, Carol, was born in Peckham, South East London, and my dad, Alan, who is 2 years older than her, grew up in the same area. They both came from working class backgrounds. Although things later went wrong between them, they were very much in love at the beginning of their marriage. Life was hard after we were born, as Dad had to work very long hours to support us, and they were living in a 1-bedroom attic flat, which was very tough on Mum with 2 babies. But eventually Dad joined the City of London police force, which meant better housing and more reliable wage for all of us. We were 5 when our parents' marriage broke up. I have some precious happy memories of the early years when they were together. They both loved music, and from an early age, Matt and I were surrounded by it. I remember Dad playing his guitar and Mum singing, but I know with some hindsight that their marriage had been unhappy for some time before they finally split. I've never believed in using the breakdown of my parents' marriage as an excuse for anything I've done in my own life. Lots of kids play on it and make out it causes them all sorts of problems. I can't pretend it made me happy, but I do not believe it lets me off the hook for my own actions, and in some ways it may have even helped me. It made me more independent and strong than I perhaps would have been. The worst thing was the unnaturalness of our relationship with our dad when he came to see us at weekends. It was as if every time we saw him it was like the first day at school, a strange feeling of having to get to know your way around, having to establish yourself, even down to putting your best clothes on, having your hair neatly brushed to go out with him. We had to build up some sort of relationship afresh every time we saw him, and I always had huge butterflies in my stomach when I knew he was coming. Dad remarried, but we never established a very comfortable relationship with our stepmother. Eventually, that marriage also ended in divorce. When we were 7, Mum met Tony, who became our stepfather. We had all the usual ups and downs with that relationship. We didn't make life easy for him. On the other hand, it was very hard for us at that age to share our mother. And we also had to get to know and accept Tony's children from his first marriage, Carolyn and Adam. Every weekend when they came to stay, we would start out dreading it, not wanting them to come. And every weekend when it was time for them to go, all 4 of us would be pleading for them to stay. We moved around a lot during the early years. Tony never had a 9-to-5 job and settled existence. Money was always tight, but we never minded that. In many ways, it was a good preparation for what was to come. There was no single moment that I realised that I was different from other kids because I was a twin. I always knew it. There are pluses and minuses in being a twin, but on the balance I think that the minuses outweigh the pluses. I don't mean I haven't loved having Matt as a brother. I wouldn't have missed that for anything. There's an indestructible bond between us. But we both had to fight all our lives to be treated as individuals, and I expect all other identical twins will recognise that problem. When you're a young child, individuality is virtually impossible. You're regarded as being half of a whole. Anyone who knows your brother assumes that you have all the identical personalities simply because you look the same. At school, you are tarred with the same brush as your brother. If I was bad, Matt was assumed to be also bad, and vice versa. Children in particular ask you stupid questions. But you get a few from adults too. When Matt broke his arm, all the other kids wanted to know why I didn't have a plaster cast on mine. When he wore a brace on his teeth, I was asked, even by adults, why I didn't have one. There's also a physical disadvantage in being twins. We knocked hell out of each other as kids. Because we were both the same size and weight, we were evenly matched in fights. And because we were equally pig-headed, neither of us would ever give in. So we slugged each other as hard as we could for as long as we could. The advantages of being a twin are obvious. From birth onwards, I had a constant close companion. There was always a friend of my own age to play with, someone to get into trouble with, and an ally against the adult world. When we were unhappy, it was shared, and we could give each other support. As toddlers, we had our own secret language that even our mum could not understand. Today, we still have telepathy. We feel things for each other, even when we are thousands of miles apart. And when we're together, we often only have to glance at the other to know what he's thinking. I've always assumed the role of the older brother. Studies of twins show that it is very common for one of them to take on the surrogate mother role with the other. It isn't necessarily the one who's born first who does this, but in this case it was. As a child, I always saw it as my job to look after Matt, to protect him. There's a deep rivalry between us, which is softened by and reduced by the great love we have for one another, which means that we generally both only want good things to happen to the other. I always feel weird when I see other identical twins. If they're very alike, I feel they look weird, something from the Twilight Zone, freaks or clones. Then I wonder if people think that about me and Matt. There's one day from my childhood that was etched forever in my memory. Mum, Tony and I walked to the counter of a music shop in Fleet, near our Camberley home. The assistant said, "Hello, Mr. Phillips, do you want it now?" I pulled up from behind the counter an electronic drum kit. I couldn't believe my eyes. I was so excited, my legs were shaking. It was the best, the greatest, the most wonderful present I've ever been given. Mum said I carried it to the car with such reverence you'd think it was a delicate crate of china. I was 12 years old and they'd scraped together the money to buy me the £400 kit. with 8 pads. I dreamed of owning my own drum kit all my life. From when I was a toddler and drove my mad banging spoons against saucepan lids, I'd been in trouble at school and at home endlessly drumming rhythms on my fingers. Matt had been given a saxophone and lessons. He'd never progressed much beyond painstakingly picking his way through Bar Bar Black Sheep, although if you hear Mum talk you'd think he was a symphony orchestra standard. I'm glad he never persevered with the sax, because he might have ended up concentrating on that and not singing, which would have been a great loss. It's hard to describe the pleasure I had from owning that drum kit. Every time I went into my bedroom, I forgot whatever else I was supposed to be doing and sat down on the edge of the bed and played the drums. When I woke in the morning, it was the first thing I looked at because it was huge and filled half the bedroom. And for a few weeks I had to remind myself that it was really mine. There were times in the first few months when I felt so frustrated by the limits of my own ability. There were moments when I felt like stabbing the drum kit with a knife, when my aching ankles wouldn't do what they were supposed to do, and when I could hear what I wanted it to sound like, but I simply didn't have the muscle developed to produce that sound. But I worked hard every day until my arms ached, my fingers bled and my head span. Matt and I met Craig Logan, who was a year younger than us, when we started at Collingwood School in Camberley. He came round to our house and we gave him a lift home on our bikes. He decided then we were completely crazy because we'd cycled across everyone's garden on the way home. We called the first band Caviar. We didn't know what Caviar was, but it sounded posh. We dressed like the early Duran Duran days. Long hair, frilly shirts, earrings. Looking back, we sounded and looked dreadful, but we thought we were great. By the time I was 14, I knew I was going to give the music business a very serious try when I left school. We were rehearsing 5 nights a week, and I'm afraid homework always took second place to drums. I knew that if I didn't make it in the music world, I could always study later. My school reports were littered with remarks like, could do better and needs to try harder. Matt was more interested in a career on stage. He had a starring role in the school production of Cabaret, in which he played the German master of ceremonies. He was brilliant. He got great reviews. But my enthusiasm for music got to him, and after playing and singing for a while with some other musicians, we teamed up properly with Craig. We found our manager locally, and after we left school, every spare hour was spent writing songs and practicing in the garden summer house. As far as I was concerned, music was the main thing in my life, but there were a couple of distractions. I've always liked girls. I've liked their company, but since I was a kid, I knew I liked them in other, more significant ways. But like most young boys, I didn't have a clue what to do about it. There was a lot of fumbling and embarrassment in store for me before I reached the stage where I could really enjoy that wonderful little game that keeps the human race going. Nature doesn't make growing up easy. You don't wake up one morning to find you've acquired a generous helping of manhood. It's a gradual process that leaves you wondering if you're ever going to be normal. I think I expected to acquire body hair like planting mustard and cress seeds at school. One day nothing, the next day a fully sprouted crop. Instead I watched for months one wispy hair follow another. Embarrassment and self-consciousness must have been the best safe sex aids ever. I'd have died rather than let any girl have had a good laugh at my expense. Despite my self-consciousness, I lost my virginity at an early age to a girl called Dawn, an appropriate name, because puberty was only just dawning on for both of us. We were upstairs in my bedroom playing Monopoly when she started asking me a few inquisitive questions about my physical development, and I certainly had a passing interest in hers. One thing led to another, and before long we were doing more than comparing notes. It wasn't exactly a romantic build-up you get in Meals on Boons, nor was it an earth-moving experience like you get in 9.5 weeks. In fact, it was over by the time we passed go and before we even got to Pall Mall. I was more scared than exhilarated afterwards, and it took me another 3 years to get round to repeating my experience. As I got a bit older, I had girlfriends, and a lot of fumbling and groping went on, me trying to pretend that I was more experienced than I really was. Tony once caught me in the bedroom, fooling around with a girl. I tried to be cool and say, "Hi, Tony." He didn't bawl out at me, he just called me downstairs and explained that he didn't mind what I did, but he didn't want me doing it at home. I thought that was pretty fair. Sadly, my memories of my early romantic encounters have been polluted by the number of people of that time in my past who have sold stories about me, and about Matt, to newspapers. Every time someone did that, it was though they robbed me of a section of my own memory. They took whole chunks of my life away from me, ran them through the machine that distorted and cheapened them, and then fed them back to me. But they were no longer anything to do with me. We wrote a song, Treasured Memories, about the pleasure of shared memories. I'm afraid that is a pleasure that has been denied me for that time of my life. The past is clouded, and lots of nice things that happened in a very normal adolescence have been soured. The only other distraction from music was the other great love of my life, cars. I was always desperate to drive. I passed my test about 5 minutes after my 17th birthday. Matt wasn't interested in driving at that stage. He later had to take a driving lesson with a mob of girls around the car. And although Craig also passed his test when he was old enough, he was never keen on driving. My affair didn't just start with brand new, top-of-the-range sports cars. My very first mechanical mistress was a £50 Fiat, which you started by pulling the switch. After writing it off against a lamppost one snow evening, I went through a succession of desperate, decrepit old rust heaps, although at the time I thought they were marvellous. Mum and Tony, like all parents, would like to see us become doctors or lawyers, but they were realistic enough to see that we weren't going to go for that. Dad was more inclined to think that we should be looking for 9-to-5 jobs, but he, too, could see that we were not going to be swayed. He was amazed by the perseverance we had already shown with our band. We went to clubs and discos in London from about 15 onwards, so we knew the looks that were in and what suited us. Mum spent hours sewing ruffles on shirts for us, and for Craig too, who spent so much of the time in our house he was like one of the family. As far as our music went, there were plenty of influences. Matt was very into Michael Jackson and Stevie Wonder. I liked the tough, bluesy sounds of people like Joe Cocker. We both liked Police, and as far as drumming goes, my idol was always Phil Collins. After we made our first demo tapes, we realised that we needed more professional management, and we were offered a contract by the company that managed the Pet Shop Boys. We were delighted to sign with them. The signature I put on that contract on the 8th of December 1986 marked the start of the rollercoaster ride of fame and success. I dare say that even if Matt, Craig and I could have peered into a crystal ball, we would still have gone ahead and put our names on that dotted line. The average 18-year-old doesn't see much further ahead than the next month, never mind the next year or even the next decade. It was an exciting time. As our new manager started to get the promotional package together for us, the name Bruce came out of a session where we all kicked ideas around. I can't remember who actually suggested it, but I know we all liked it. I'm sure the fact that we were twins and we looked okay in pictures helped sell us both to our management and then to the record company. Matt and I never consciously used it, but I know we were aware of the advantages. Before too long we had signed the record deal, a good one for a band completely unknown. The money meant that we were able to buy a Suzuki Jeep as a band vehicle, and because I was the only one who liked driving in London, I was the one who got the most pleasure from it. Our days were spent working on songs for the new album. Recording it was a shock. I'd always played live drums on the demo tapes we'd made before, but now we were moving into the sort of class recording where drums are programmed, because it takes too much time and costs too much money to do it live. I didn't have a clue how to use a computer, and there were days I'd arrive at the studio to find the drums already programmed. I was worried and insecure. I used to listen to it, and it sounded great. I didn't think I could do it any better. So I go home and literally burst into tears, and I began to doubt my own ability, and I felt useless and uninvolved. Craig was in the same boat because the bass was also programmed, but I don't think it affected him as deeply. That was okay, he was singing. They can't get a computer to do that, and he was getting lots of support and feedback because everyone was telling him what a brilliant voice he had. Whenever I said anything about my doubts, everyone, including Matt and Craig, would tell me it was for the good of the album. Apart from that, making the album was very exciting, very professional, so far at the league anything else we'd ever done before, that we couldn't sleep at night for thinking about it. I had no idea if anybody would buy it or what kind of people would buy it. I knew nothing about marketing strategies. I'd probably never even heard of the phrase. We had a collective brainstorm session to think of a name for the album. Everyone loved Push. We could see the potential for having it on door stickers of record shops with Push on them, complete with the name of the band and the logo. It was a very, very clever idea. The first single that was released from the album was I Owe You Nothing, which came out for the first time in August 1987. It went to number 70-something in the charts, but it did quite well in the clubs. The video was very arty, with us surrounded by about 30 models, lots of dry ice and spooky lighting. When it didn't make it into the top 40 on the first attempt, the crucial top 40, I thought our whole pop career might collapse. But the record company had invested a lot of money in us, and they were prepared to give it a much bigger go than that. They released When Will I Be Famous 3 months later, with a very street cred video, with the three of us mooching through Soho. When Will I Be Famous was a cheeky title, a great gimmick, and it did the trick. When the midweek chart position came in, it was at number 41. We knew if it went up we were okay, but if it went down, we'd have something to worry about. I remember sitting on the settee at Mum's house, waiting for the charts at Radio 1 to come in. A new chart entry was announced at number 40. It wasn't us. I nearly died. I was so despondent, and then the DJ said, there was a new band that might go places just in at number 39. It was us. I exploded. Matt was upstairs and I thought he was asleep, but he suddenly screamed downstairs, jumping around and going mad. It was the most amazing feeling as we hugged and laughed and cried. The first break into the charts was the greatest buzz of all. Much more buzzy than going straight in at number 2 with our next release, to hear the name of your band on national radio for the first time. Wow. We got our first real hot promotion when Kathy Gilby, the producer of Going Live, booked us on the Boxing Day programme. We were still total unknowns, just creeping in at the bottom of the charts, so it was a great spot to get. We owe a lot to her back in a hunch. The next day I got my first taste of fame, my first reaction from a fan. I was on Waterloo Station, about to tuck into a hamburger at Casey Jones, when a girl screamed at me. I was so freaked out I nearly screamed back. I looked behind me to see if there was anyone famous there. It was very weird, and I was as shocked as she was. Life was never going to be normal again, but the great thing for me was that I'd already met someone to share it with, someone who would, throughout the whole madness of the coming years, be my drip-feed of reality, Shirley Lewis. I first met Shirley at Hot Night Studio in Fulham Broadway, where we were making our first album. I was standing in the control room. On the floor, recording the backing vocals for us, were 3 girls. I ran my eyes along them. I admit now that I'd set out for the studio that day with the express purpose of checking out these girls, who were top-quality singers who had worked with people like George Michael and Elton John. I was impressed by their professional background, and I wanted to know whether their looks matched up. It was the casual, chauvinistic attitude of any 18-year-old guy, but I was soon shaken out of it. When my eyes hit Shirley on the right of the lineup, it was like a jolt of electricity going through me. She's pretty tall and she's got a great body and a great face. The other 2 girls, her sister Dee Lewis and her friend Helena, were also both attractive, but I never gave them a second glance after I clocked Shirley. I couldn't take my eyes off her. I wanted her from the first moment I saw her. I stared at her throughout the session, trying to force her to look at me. She knew I was looking at her, and the harder I stared, the more determined she became not to look at me. If she caught my glance, she'd look away again quickly. At some point, something amusing happened in the studio and we both laughed, and I caught her eye then. And for a moment we exchanged a smile that was nothing to do with what we were laughing at. It was a smile between us. The sexual tension between us, before we'd even spoken to each other, was explosive. I felt like a schoolboy falling in love for the first time. After the session we went to a club together. Shirley and I flirted, but in a very subtle, restrained way, which made me more desperate for her, but also desperate not to do anything to spoil the delicious flirtation. We talked all night. I felt she fancied me, but I knew this was something more than a normal pickup. I wasn't going to risk it by making a move. Shirley was so classy, I couldn't believe I had a chance. I was very surprised when she told me how old she was. 27. She looked so gorgeous, and although I knew she was obviously older than me, I didn't think the difference was 9 years. She also told me she had a 3-year-old daughter. I felt that this all took her out of my league. She was a mature woman with a life of her own. At the end of the evening she wrote her phone number down and gave a piece of paper to Craig saying that if we were ever in town we should give her a call. I was really miserable. I thought it meant she liked Craig. I felt more for Shirley in one evening than I had felt for any other girl I had ever met, and I was desolate to think that she preferred him. The following day in the studio I plucked up the courage to ring Shirley. Craig made me do it. He said it was clear to him that she fancied me. I remember thinking, I'll ring her and if she's offhand, it'll be terrible, but at least I will know. Sod it. What is there to lose except my pride? You only get one go at most things in life, and I decided I wasn't going to pass Shirley up for fear of rejection. With butterflies in my stomach, I left a message on her answer machine, and when she called me back, I felt so excited as a kid at Christmas. Our relationship started properly later that week. When we finally touched each other, all the pent-up longing came out like a steam from a safety valve. It was so special, so different. I had no idea that you could feel so much emotion as well as physical pleasure making love to somebody. When she had to go home in the early hours of the morning, I put the lights on. I couldn't get over how gorgeous she looked. Most girls look wrecked after a night of passion. Shirley looks incredible, just as beautiful as the evening before. She was completely in my head after that night. My stomach churned like a tumble dryer whenever I thought about her, and I could not stop thinking about her. It was almost like pain gnawing away inside me. I'd never felt like that before. It was so intense. It was a very physical relationship from the word go. We couldn't get enough of each other. But the amazing thing was that when the sex stopped, we had so much to talk about. We were on the same wavelength, and everything about her was everything I'd ever wanted. Shirley comes from East London, and she's been in the music business since she was 14. Her oldest sister is Linda Lewis, who was a successful rock singer in the 70s, and Shirley started singing background vocals for her. Shirley, who is half South American, is a naturally born singer. She'd never had a lesson in her life. She was thrown into the deep end, found she had a good ear, and quickly developed a good reputation. She's done an 18-month tour with Elton John. She's toured with George Michael, sung on their albums. She's worked with Billy Ocean and loads of others. She met Jim Wheatley, the father of her daughter Carly, when she was 14, and started living with him when she was 18. He's the only other long relationship she's had. When their daughter Carly was born, Shirley already knew that she didn't love Jim. but they stayed together because it was the best arrangement for the baby. Because Shirley was the main breadwinner, Jim stayed at home with Carly while she worked. At the beginning of our relationship, we'd meet at friends' flats or hotel rooms, and in the early hours of the morning Shirley would go home to Carly. What developed between Shirley and me was a real friendship, and it was something that I'd never had before. It was like pressing the fast-forward button on the video. We reached the stage of really knowing each other so quickly. I'm always aware what a very sexual lady she is, and that has added to my insecurities. I know that I fancied her, and other guys would fancy her too. In the early days, I was self-conscious about my lack of money, and about not having my own place. It made me feel so young, but Shirley never once made me feel it mattered, and she's never mentioned it since. We got serious very quickly. Because Shirley was older and because she had a child, we needed to know where we were going quite soon. She always made it quite plain to me that she was a package, that she came complete with Carly. I was scared stiff of the responsibility. I had my 19th birthday 3 months after we met, and taking on a child seemed a very seasoned, mature thing to do. But I was most scared of losing Shirley, and I did a lot of rapid growing up. After 3 or 4 months, I met Carly. It was a weird experience, but I was completely bowled over by her. She was so gorgeous, so pretty and so cute, with long curly hair and a little high-pitched voice. It made me even more jealous of Jim. I knew then, whatever I gave to Shirley, no matter how much I loved her, I could never give her the first child. I could buy her a Rolls Royce, but it would mean nothing compared to the living flesh of her own daughter. I knew that the little person in the back seat of a car was the greatest thing she would ever have, and I was not a part of it. Carly was the living proof of Shirley's relationship with Jim. It was a strange and sad feeling, and I ached to be the father of her child. We agreed by this time that we wanted to live together all the time. I wanted to wake up in the morning next to Shirley, not to see her rushing out to the hotel room to go home before Carly woke up. I wanted to do ordinary things with her, sit and watch telly together, eat meals together, without going out to fancy restaurants, be together 24 hours a day, not just snatched hours. In the early days, we lived in a succession of different flats. Because Carly was used to living with Jim while Shirley was away on tour, it was agreed at first she would continue to live with him and spend weekends with Shirley and me. Shirley didn't have an easy ride with my family, just as I found it difficult to get my head round having Carly. She found it hard coming to terms with how close I was to Matt and Mum. She said she was shocked how much I told them about our lives and how, if we had an argument, I would tell them about it. It was also natural that my family were worried about me getting involved with a woman 9 years older than me, the mother of a young child. It took Matt about 1.5 years to really get on with Shirley. He realised eventually that Shirley and I had something very special going for us. They gradually built up a good relationship. They tease each other, occasionally have real arguments, but underneath, they are very fond of each other. Mum, Tony and Dad have all now had plenty of time to get to know Shirley, and they all love her. Our success was bigger, wilder, more out of control than anything Britain has seen before. At the height of our fame, there were 40,000 paid-up members for our fan club, the biggest fan club in Europe, probably in the world. Everywhere we went, hundreds of them would be there, screaming at us, pouring at us, demanding a part of us. It was exhilarating, exciting and enjoyable, but it was also freaky, weird and unsettling. It was the dream I had dreamed when I formed my first band at the age of 12. It was also the nightmare of a life without privacy, without rest, and dangerously close to being without sanity. I don't have a lot of time for actors and film stars who complain about fans invading their privacy or space because, after all, we go into any branch of show business hoping that the public will like us, will become our fans. But the mania that pursued Bros was much harder to deal with than someone coming up to you in a restaurant for an autograph or following you around a supermarket. We literally could not move outside our homes without bodyguards to side our way through the clamouring girls. Our houses and our cars were constantly daubed with love messages. Our neighbours were subjected to seeing their streets become crowded as football terraces. My girlfriend was abused and threatened. Wherever we went, there were photographers on our towers. Even when Shirley and I thought we had shaken everybody off and we were enjoying a quiet meal together, a flashbulb would pop in our faces, or we would think that we had not been spotted, only to see a picture in the following day's newspaper. It didn't take me long to wonder whether I was in the right job. I remember admiring a beautiful Porsche outside a restaurant when we arrived for a meal one evening, only to discover it belonged to one of the paparazzis who was following me all over to take pictures of me. He probably made more out of Bros than I did. We read stories of ourselves in the press that were so bizarrely inaccurate we could only laugh at them. Not only were Matt and I not twins, we were not even brothers. It's amazing what you can do with makeup, said one article. It would have been very easy to become a head case. We were only just 19 when the mania hit, and the transformation in our lives was so fast that it was hard to get your brain around. We were caught up in the frenetic whirlwind of activity, and we were desperately short of hours in which to sleep, let alone spend time thinking about it all. Looking back at those days, I see nothing but a blur of travelling, performing, giving interviews, doing TV shows, and desperately trying to squeeze in a private life. Trying to sort out in my own mind what happened, I sometimes find myself flippantly wondering, was I actually there? On one occasion I switched the television on in a hotel bedroom, and it was the celebrity quiz program Blanksy Blank. One of the celebrities made a joke about Bros, and the whole audience laughed and clapped. That was when I knew that we were really famous, not just idolised by thousands of very young girls. From the moment the records started making it, we had to start touring and promoting them. There was a British tour that sold out in 40 minutes, as fast as they could hand over the tickets to the box office. There were tours in Europe and a world tour. You never get the chance to appreciate the places you go to. One posh plastic hotel is much the same as any other. One massive screaming girls is much the same as any other. One stadium is much the same as any other. And one TV studio is much the same as any other. And at that stage, all the journalists asked much the same questions, whatever the language. Here's a typical day from our schedule at the time. Up at 6 a.m, wakened by my personal assistant and my bodyguard, who would have stayed at my home that night before. We each had to have a personal assistant to cope with the pressure of our engagements, and a bodyguard was needed just to allow us to move. They were both very expensive items of our budgets, but we couldn't have functioned properly or normally without them. The first hour was spent getting ready. You can't walk out your front door into a horde of fans looking like a slob. My case would have been packed the day before, with perhaps 6 outfits for 4 days. Breakfast between 7 a.m. and 7:30 a.m, and then into the chauffeur-driven car at about 7:45. We'd drive to Heathrow. Just before we reached the M4, I'd ring Shirley to tell her I love her, even though I'd only left her less than an hour ago. I hate aeroplanes, and I have a superstition that if I die in a crash, I want her to remember that the last words I said to her were, I love you. At the beginning of the tunnel approaching the airport, we would be picked up by a police escort. The police would make a decision about whether or not we were going to pass through the airport. If there were only 200 or 300 fans there, they would let us go through. But usually if there were more, they would have driven us straight round airside, which is relatively hassle-free. If we had to go through the airport, it would have always been difficult. At the other end, we'd be met by a couple of people from the record company, and we'd all pile into a chauffeured Merc and head straight for the hotel. We'd be booked into huge rooms, usually suites with bedrooms as big as a living room. In the early days, it was a matter of dumping your bags and getting straight to work, maybe doing 8 interviews with journalists on the trot. I'd be sick of hearing myself speak, and I could never understand how anyone was interested in such trivia about us. You've got to keep a sense of proportion, or you end up believing your own myth. You end up thinking it really matters what you had for breakfast. When you get big, you can eat before work. That's a difference we all noticed. The record company lays on lunch and restricts the interviews until after you've eaten. Then it's rehearsal, gig, collapse into bed, up at 6 a.m. again to move on and start again. People who have never travelled much think it must be wonderful to stay in 4 or 5-star hotels all the time with everything laid on. Well, the novelty soon wears thin. Sometimes you give anything for a massive scoff. 3 slices of toast, baked beans, crispy bacon and mayonnaise. Instead you'd get a silly little sandwich with the crust cut off and a cocktail stick holding them together. I never learned the knack of eating them. Sometimes I'd be so hungry I'd stick them into my mouth, stick and all, and nearly gouge my gums out. The other times I'd take the sticks out and the whole sandwich would disintegrate. I think they were meant for decoration than satisfying hunger. It also sounds a bit precious to always insist on having a suite in a hotel. But if you just have a room, you find yourself lying in bed in the morning, the sheets have slipped off and you're naked to the world, and there are 3 or 4 maids coming in carrying 1 cup of tea between them. Because who you were, we always got a lot of attention from the hotel staff, but there were times when I'd prefer not to have it. In a suite, my PA would handle the staff. It's easy to sound a complete brat, but it's very lonely living your life in a hotel room after hotel room. I'd often wake up in the morning and smack my head on the wall, because the bed wouldn't be where you thought it was, because I wasn't at home, nor even in the same hotel room that I was in the night before. There's also a strange unreality about the hours we lived. Because we'd finish a gig and we'd all be hyped up, you can't just put your head down and go to sleep 10 minutes after getting back to your hotel. It was so hard to unwind. We'd have a meal, try to come down to normal, but it would inevitably be the early hours of the morning before we were able to sleep. On any plane journey, we'd always get plenty of approaches from fans sitting in second class. We'd usually ask the stewardess to collect all the things they wanted signing, and we'd sit half an hour or an hour just doing that. We soon realised it was a mistake to go back and see them. It was all right walking down the aisle to get there, but the time you turned round to get back, you'd find yourself face to face 3 inches away from somebody's home video camera, and you'd find yourself doing an Eskimo kiss with a lens. You couldn't tell them where to stuff it because you wouldn't look too good when they showed it to their friends back home, so you had to stay and smile and pretend you didn't mind. They'd often thrust a message into your hand that they wanted you to read to the camera, sending love to all the folks back home. Only usually you couldn't read the writing. There must be some very odd home movies with me dotted about Britain. Because our fans were so young, we felt a tremendous sense of responsibility towards them. Every time we gave an interview, we felt that we had to say sensible things. We were against drugs and we don't smoke, so that part wasn't difficult. But it was hard not throwing in the odd swear word, and I won't pretend that I never drank anything stronger than milkshakes. We soon realised that everything we said, even if it meant to be a joke, would be taken up and repeated, so we had to guide ourselves very closely. On the one or two occasions we relaxed with journalists, we lived to regret it. From the moment the second single hit the top, there were never less than 600 girls outside Mum's and Tony's. To this day, Mum has mirrored glass on her windows so that from the inside you can see out, but from outside you can't see in. It was the only way to preserve any privacy in there. But it's very odd. Normal people don't live like that. Mum and Tony have coped with it very well, although it was very difficult for them. They'd wake up in the morning and Mum would pull back the curtains and a loud ooh would go up from all the girls on the pavement outside, who had either been there all night or had arrived very early. Girls would scrawl their names and love messages all over the front of the house, on the cars and on the steps. Fans have absolutely no regard for property. They would write in the permanent marker all over anything. The Jeep had a convertible roof which had to be scrubbed with terps to get the fans' signatures off. They might write "We love you, Luke," but it never seemed like a gesture of love. We had a core of about 40 or 50 fans who were always there, who I got to recognise and know by name. They were always hurt when I couldn't remember their names, but there are only a certain number of Claires, Jackies, Julies, Tinas and Debbies you can sort out in your head. And I'd often get them mixed up. We were generally fond of them. You appreciate someone who will stand outside in all weathers just to see you. We were also generally worried about them. They came from all over the country and would sleep rough to be outside your house. There were stories of fans being mugged, teachers were upset, a number of girls playing truant. Parents wanted their daughters back home. We were forever telling them all to go home, reminding them to at least ring their families. Not all the fans were lovely, some would be very abusive. If Mum said we weren't there, they wouldn't believe her. And from the very beginning we suffered from envy from young guys who would throw stones at the Peckham house and hurl abuse at us and our families. Even to this day I can't walk down a street in London without some bloke or other making a rude gesture or calling me something choice. I never got to understand why guys hated us so much, why complete strangers felt they had the right to spit at us, or wind their car windows down when we were in traffic jams next to them and call us obscene names, often in front of Shirley. We got plenty of hate mail. The nasty ones, the ones that threatened to kill us, we handed over to the police. Shirley came in for a lot of verbal abuse. Black Cow would be one of the more repeatable names she was called. For the first 18 months of our fame, we enjoyed it. There were problems, but the good things outweighed the bad, and we were on a real high, happy to exist much of the time. It's great to feel successful in anything in life. We got a tremendous buzz from it, and we enjoyed a lot of genuine companionship and good fun together on the road. But you can forget any idea of normal, private, family life, as we soon found out. Shirley was my saviour during the mad years of fans and fame. She was wise to all the bullshit and the games that go on in the music business, and she slammed reality down my throat from day one. If I was behaving like a prat or an arsehole, she told me. I think I would have been strong enough to have survived the last few years without becoming a basket case anyway, but having Shirley with me made it so much easier. Matt became the most glamorous member of the group, mainly because he was the lead singer, but also because he didn't have a girlfriend, and he was therefore obviously available for the fantasies of the fans. But I felt very sorry for him. His was a very lonely life, with nobody to turn to or confide in. He also never knew why any girl he dated went out with him. Was it because she really liked him, or was it because he was Matt Goss at Bros? Life for Shirley and me was not easy, and for the first couple of years we rowed a lot. In the first year of living together, I was actually at home with Shirley for only 8 weeks, and that's if you count every evening as a full day. It created tremendous pressure, although it meant that the fire and the passion was kept well and truly alive. Absence certainly does make the heart grow fonder. When we saw each other after a few weeks, we would rip each other's clothes off 2 seconds after getting inside our own front door. We lived in several different flats, but it never took long for the fans to catch up with us, to the annoyance of the neighbours. I remember one morning when we were enjoying a few loving moments in bed together, when Shirley said, Luke, look out the window." I turned and saw 8 eager faces peering at us. Somehow the fans had got across the gardens and round the back of the basement flat. See what I mean about no privacy? They could also hear us from the front of the flat whenever Shirley and I had a row, which we did quite a lot at this stage of our relationship. Usually they would side with her. When she went out, the girls would say things like, "Luke had no right to speak to you like that." There I was, trying to find my way through a new and very precious relationship, and I had 200 Claire Rayners at my doorstep. Looking back, both Shirley and I think it was a miracle that our love survived this part of our lives together. Shirley was torn between Carly and me at weekends, and I was resentful of Carly's presence at weekends, as it was the only time I was going to see Shirley. Shirley was always referred to in the press as a dusky beauty. It made us laugh. None of them had the imagination to think up anything original. At one point, our management decided we should all buy a flat together, me, Matt and Craig. It was a crazy idea. Who would imagine that 3 guys who had worked together all day wanted to live together? That the 3 healthy, red-blooded guys would want to settle down in a bachelor pad together. I never moved in, but I did become a 1/3 owner of the flat in Maida Vale. Just before we started our tour of Australia, Shirley and I had a huge row and split up. It is possible in a pop business to get eaten up by your own fame and start playing by the rules of other people think you should. As stars, you're expected to go to the right places, be seen with the right people. I remember going to a Batman premiere and everyone was jostling in a not too obvious way to have their photograph taken. Because if the photographers weren't after you, you're nobody. Celebrities are funny creatures. They greet other stars like long-lost friends, even if they have never met them before. There's a shallow camaraderie of the famous, but there is no genuine support for each other. There are lots of snobberies and divisions within the music industry, and lots of cutthroat rivalries. I was part of it. Nothing that I was living amongst did anything to make me a better person. Stardom doesn't show you how to behave or what to value, what to aim for. You live in an ostentation city. There is no freedom to move into any other world because you are hemmed in by the fans, the management people who plan every minute of your day to day, and your own sheer exhaustion. You start to get a very two-dimensional picture of yourself, almost as though you believe the rubbish the newspapers keep writing about you. The years of our fame were the years that most young people do a lot of growing up, finding their role in the adult world, establishing themselves. They do this by mixing with different people, making judgment about the sort of life they'd want to lead and the friends they'd want to have. We were denied, because of the pressures of our work and our inability to move around normally, any chance to mix with anyone other than those in the music business. My relationship with Shirley almost became a casualty of all this. I started to take her for granted. I ignored the fact that she had the same headaches and the same craziness caused by the fans as I did. There are plenty of things for any ordinary couple to row about. We had all those, plus the whole bag more. The first 5 years is almost testing for any relationship, and it's always a miracle when a couple get through it. If you think of all the normal problems and multiply them by 4, that's what we had. Everything we did was under the spotlight. Every suspicion we ever had about each other was stoked up by malicious press stories. I know it comes with the territory, but it's still bloody hard to get through. We split up when I flew to Australia for the world tour. I was going to be away for 3 months, which would be the longest we'd ever been apart. We parted from each other without speaking, but I thought about her all the time on the 27-hour flight. I stuck it out for 2 weeks and then I called her at her mum's house. She was being really tough and didn't want to know me. For about a month I didn't call her again, although I was longing to. Then one day I did, and although she didn't say everything was alright, she agreed to meet me at the flat when I got home. I went to a lot of trouble to impress her. I brought her flowers, I gave her a beautiful Rolex watch, and turned up to take her out to dinner wearing a suit and driving a new car. We sat in the restaurant drinking wine and gazing at each other across the table. The meal came, but after a couple of mouthfuls I said to Shirley, "Do you want to stay here?" She shook her head. I paid the bill, we drove home, and fell on each other passionately. We did what we both wanted to do from the moment she opened the door of the flat to me. It was wonderful, and I swore that we would never let this business come between us again. She knew then that I loved her. I showed her that I did that evening, and I promised never to take her for granted again. We ended up having takeaway hamburgers much, much later. The best thing I ever bought Shirley was a car. It was a Golf convertible. She was doing a video shoot and I turned up outside with the car, with a huge pink ribbon round it, a bottle of champagne and 2 glasses. She couldn't believe her eyes. It was a great buzz for me. It was a lovely day, so we cruised around with the top down, and I kept thinking, wow, I just bought my missus a new car. Cars were one of my great loves, and my one true extravagance, but I got a greater thrill out of buying one for Shirley than any of my own. It dawned on me one day that what I really wanted for me and Shirley was a proper home of our own, somewhere we could really be private and secure in. I wanted a house. I sold my share of the flat in Maida Vale to Matt, and this gave me a deposit to put down on the house, with a mortgage of £200,000. I had £250,000 to spend. It sounds a lot of money, but this was 1989 when the house prices were ridiculously high. and that kind of money certainly didn't buy anything very swanky. We found a bungalow in Frimley in Surrey. Our mortgage repayments were £3,000 a month. I love the bungalow. I did the interior design myself. I hate cluttered rooms, and I love modern furniture. I had sunken lights fitted with blue stained glass filters over them, and wall lights that were all carefully moulded into the walls. There was an electric blue carpet throughout, and the furniture was black and chrome. I had a pool table and a big stone-built barbecue at the back and with a roof over it. We loved entertaining friends and family at weekends. It was my first proper home, and I was very excited about it. Shirley and I went on a £58,000 spending spree to get all the furniture for it, but we were literally starting from scratch. We needed everything, from beds right down to knives and forks. We lived at the bungalow for 2.5 years, and during this time Carly came to live with us permanently. At first, I didn't feel like her stepfather, and I've never, ever tried to take the place of her father. Jim will always be Dad, and I will always be Luke to her. As a stepchild myself, I know the dangers. You've got to take it easy, take it slowly, gradually build up the relationship. The rules are very delicate. You can't just be strict, but also you can't buy a stepchild either. It's a mixture of authority, friendship, and eventually, in its own time, love. Then you get the rewards. Occasionally, Carly says to me, "Can you put me to bed?" Which is what Shirley usually does for her. Then you know that you are getting there. She tells me she loves me sometimes, and it's spontaneous and nice. At the height of our fame came the saddest event of my life, the death of my sister Carolyn. She was a pretty 18-year-old, very clever. She had passed 10 O-levels and 3 A-levels. She had everything ahead of her, the world at her feet. She was a happy girl, a good mate and great fun to be with. She was popular with her school friends, and she was very generous, always fixing up stunts to raise money for charity. And then she was dead. It was as sudden and as brutal and as unbelievable as that. It was Good Friday 1988, but there was nothing good about that day for my family. A drunken driver killed Carolyn and her friend Emma as they drove home in Carolyn's car. The driver that killed Carolyn died too. Her death was officially recorded at the inquest as accidental, because there was no witnesses to the crash. But the coroner said that, although he could not technically record a verdict of unlawful killing, he felt that Kaz and Emma had been killed. Kaz was a part of my life from the moment that her dad, Tony, moved in with my mum. There may have been no blood relationship between Matt and me and her brother Adam, but we were close as any natural brother and sister. We played together, squabbled together, teased each other, and we were all very proud of each other. We loved each other. Kaz was planning to go to university, but first she was going to Israel to work on a kibbutz for a few months. She wanted to travel, to see the world, experience new things. My main regret now is that we didn't have the time to see much of Kaz in the last 6 months before her death. We didn't see much of any of our family in those mad days, but most of all I feel sorry for Tony and his ex-wife. She was their daughter, on the verge of womanhood. I don't believe that Tony has ever come to terms with his loss. The funeral was one of the worst days of my life. We appealed to the fans to stay away. We wanted to be there, but we didn't want to turn the event into a circus. The fans showed a great deal of restraint and respect, and not one of them turned up at the church. I wish I could say the same for the national press. I was crying as Matt and I walked side by side out of the church, in front of our sister's coffin, into a battery of camera lenses. There were at least 20 photographers there, all laughing and chatting away to each other, as if they were outside a film premiere. As soon as they spotted us, they started clicking away. My anger overcame me, and I swore at them. It was a spontaneous outburst of real fury towards them. We may be Bros, we may be famous, we may have thousands of fans, but on that day we were 2 19-year-old boys who had lost their 18-year-old sister, and we had the right to be left in privacy. I understand that my anger should really have been directed at the newspaper decision-makers who sent those men to take pictures. Sure, they're only obeying orders, but it's no excuse for losing your sense of common decency and humanity. I'd like to think if I'd been a photographer asked to do that job, I would have refused. Those who did do it should at least show the courtesy not to giggle and chat outside a church where a funeral service for a young girl was being held. I regretted my outburst bitterly the next day, but not because I had changed my feelings towards the photographers. Bros in 4-letter fury at funeral, said the front page headline of The Sun, with a picture of me in tears. The memories of Kaz's funeral that we all have will never be taken away from us by the crash treatment, but nonetheless an intensively private moment was tarnished. My only consolation is that I believe most people who saw that front page will have asked themselves why on earth the cameras had to be spying on us, and most people will have understood exactly how I felt. It was in October 1988 that I flew out to Australia for the start of the world tour, known as the Global Push Tour. It cost about £1 million to lay on the tour, because we travelled with 47 people and 8 tons of equipment. The equipment alone cost $60,000 to air freight to the first leg of the tour to Australia. I was excited to be going. It was a tremendous opportunity to see the world, and it was going to show us whether our appeal was wider than just Britain. We knew we sold records abroad, but would we pull in the crowds to our shows? We were curious to find out. Australia was beautiful. The work was hard. We arrived after a 27-hour flight and had 40 minutes at our hotel to freshen up and then straight into 10 days solid work. But we enjoyed the country and the people. After 2 weeks in Australia, we flew to Japan, which was a completely different sort of experience. We had a huge following there, and we were amused to see a 2-page spread in one of their national newspapers with a picture strip of 12 photographs telling fans how to dry their hair like Bros. The really trendy TV show out there was called The Funky Tomato. The name was in English because all the programmes aimed at kids have English or really American titles. When we arrived to do the live show, there were 2,000 fans there, and all there was holding them back was a little white rope. The organiser of the tour said we would not need bodyguards. Japanese fans knew how to behave themselves in a dignified way, he said. He was wrong. When we arrived, this high-pitched shriek went up, as though somebody had stood on a cat, or a lot of cats because it was so loud, and suddenly we were in a rerun of every encounter with fans we'd ever had. In the end, we had to be rushed out of the building through the back door. Our Japanese fans tended to be a bit older than our English fans, and the girls were very cute. They would get embarrassed, put their hands over their mouths, and walk up and down on the spot. They called us Mato-san and Luka-san. Like fans all over the world, they bought us gifts. But what gifts? We'd find Comme des Garçons shirts and Jean-Paul Gaultier jackets delivered to our hotel rooms. It was in Japan that Craig's problem started, and we launched into the unpleasant episode that would end with him leaving the band, and Matt and me, particularly me, being made out as the baddies, when all we were trying to do was keep the band, which was his band as well as ours, in business. Craig was exhausted. Matt and I were bigger and stronger than he was. Craig isn't small, but he's more slightly built than either of us. I always felt very protective towards Craig. Just as I viewed Matt as my younger brother, Craig was my little brother. He'd been so involved with the whole of our family for so long that we really did think of him as a brother. I loved him, and I would have belted anyone who said anything against him. He, for his part, could always make me laugh, and that's a great releaser of tension. The public saw Craig as an underdog, but he never was. Outside Britain, he and I attracted as many fans as Matt. We never treated Craig as anything other than an equal, but in fact it was my idea to start the band, and from our earliest days Matt and I were always more dedicated than he was. We always defended him. We turned down an advertising contract with BMW because they only wanted Matt and me, not Craig. We were all suffering on the tour. For 12 months we scarcely had any time off, and the pressure of the fans on the doorstep took its toll on all of us. In Japan, Craig's exhaustion began to get the better of him. When we continued the tour in Germany, he said that he was too tired to stand up on stage, and he wasn't well enough to do interviews and other promotional work. The dramatic effect of the shows was ruined with Craig sitting down. We had an expensive and spectacular opening, which had to be jettisoned. The whole show was high-energy production, with lots of running around. We were young, fit guys, and that's what our fans wanted to see. For Craig to sit down all evening meant that we had to tone it all down all the way through. It wasn't the same show, and we all felt we were cheating our fans. I felt very strongly that Craig should sort himself out. If he was ill, he should pull out. If he wasn't ill, and he was just tired, as we all were, he should make an effort for the sake of the band. I hated the uncertainty of not knowing whether he was going to do the full show or this emasculated sitting-down version, and I was irritated by all the mollycoddling of him that went on. He was resting while Matt and I were doing all the promotional work, and he was being pushed around in a wheelchair backstage. I didn't understand it. If he was sick enough for a wheelchair, I felt he should have pulled out. If it had been me, I would have taken action, got the problem sorted out, and been back, fit and well, as soon as I could. One evening he was sitting in his wheelchair, and I asked him fairly fiercely, "What's happening tonight? Are you standing up or sitting down?" He replied that he hadn't thought about it. "What do you mean you haven't thought about it?" I shouted. I was angry. "It's our show. We're going on stage in 20 minutes. What do you mean?" I was shouting, and he started having a go back at me. In a fury, I advanced and pushed him, telling him to get his act together. He screamed back that I could only hit him because he was in a wheelchair. It was a ludicrous thing to say. If he'd been a cripple, I would have been bang out of order. But I would have been the first to admit it. But he was a guy the same age as me, my mate. He was rolling over and letting this illness thing take hold of him, instead of fighting it. And it was making me mad. My bodyguard grabbed me from behind, which made me even more angry. and as I swung my arms I clipped Craig, but only lightly. The bodyguard hauled me away and I was struggling to get free, and Matt was trying to help me, shouting, "Leave my brother alone." Everyone else was fussing around Craig. I couldn't believe that this is what it had all come down to. I'd been working myself silly, and I was being treated as Mr. Bad Guy, the sort of person who hits a man in a wheelchair. There were tears running down my face when the bodyguard released me, and Matt and I ran out of the stadium. It was a big show. There were already 10,000 fans in their seats waiting for us. We'd no idea where we were or where we were going, but we ran for about a quarter of a mile and sat down on the grass verge. We talked it through and calmed down and walked back with our arms around each other. One thing we realised that night was that the bond between us was as strong as ever, and we were sharing this problem. After all that, it was inevitable that Craig would sit down on stage, so we were only able to deliver our tame, half-vaulted show. We went back to the hotel without speaking to him. The following morning we saw Craig being driven off in the tour bus, but we didn't think anything of it. The bus was often used to chauffeur people about. It was only later on that our tour manager came to tell us that Craig had gone home to England. We were gobsmacked. He hadn't even said goodbye to us. I know we'd argued bitterly the night before, but band members, locked for too long into each other's company, often row, and that's true of most groups, not just Bros. Craig had seen Matt and me come to blows before, and considering how much we'd been carrying him, we thought he'd owed us the courtesy of an explanation and a goodbye. Neither Matt nor me are the sort of people that bear grudges. We'd just given him a big hug. We were to see Craig just once more as Bros. When he left his sickbed to come to the British Pop Industry Awards in February 1989, we were presented with the award for the best British newcomers voted by Radio 1 listeners. We knew no more about Craig's illness than any of his fans. We were unable to get in touch with him, and the only information we had was what we read in the newspapers. At no time did Craig ever ring us or see us to tell us that he no longer wanted to be part of the band. The next communication that we had from him after the BPI Awards was served on us by his lawyers. He wanted to negotiate a settlement for leaving Bros, and we found ourselves facing him across the desk with lawyers at our sides. I made a desperate bid to cut through the appalling web of misunderstanding that had been woven between us. "Craig, what's happening? Can't we just talk?" I said. He looked at his lawyer, and his lawyer answered for him. And I knew then that the closeness and the comradeship of our years together counted for nothing. He left Bros with a substantial payment, and we've never seen him since. I know nothing about Craig now, and if I met him, I hope we could say hi and be civilised for old time's sake. But he is a stranger to me, and I would prefer not to meet him. There is now too much water under the bridge for us to put our arms round each other and share a laugh like we used to. It's too late. I don't want to go through my life nursing a grudge, and I hope I have now got my feelings about Craig into perspective. He cost me a lot of money and a lot of frustration and a lot of pain. He isn't going to cost me a lot of bitterness. Like all bands, we were very keen to conquer America. We never made it. We did the wrong American tour at the wrong time, and it was the beginning of the end for us. Less than 48 hours after performing in front of 65,000 screaming fans at Wembley Stadium, I was on stage in San Francisco in front of an audience of 7,000 with an 8-year-old kid in the front row with his fingers in his ears. Half the audience were very, very young kids, even by our standards. The other half were their parents, many of them wearing bored expressions and earplugs. We were appearing as special guests on Debbie Gibson's tour. Debbie has a very young following, and neither Matt nor I would have chosen her tour for an assault on America. Our management had arranged it. From that first concert, we knew it was going to be a disaster. The audience was completely wrong for our sound. When we got on stage, the atmosphere was non-existent. People were wandering around buying hot dogs. There were a few claps when we were introduced, but most of the audience weren't even paying attention. The concerts were an uphill battle every night, but sometimes we did manage to breathe life into Frankenstein and get the crowd tapping their feet and cheering. We covered a lot of America, but I'm afraid it's all one big blur. Looking out the tour coach window, one freeway looked much like another. Eating at 2 a.m, one truck stop is much like another. I saw enough to know that America is a very lonely place, peopled with cynics. Although they are outwardly very optimistic and friendly, have a nice day, they are deeply distrustful, always looking for a catch in everything. I think if you were lying in the street dying, they'd be trying to figure out what was your angle. The high spot of the American tour was our 21st birthday party, which was when we were appearing in Dallas. We were determined that the miserable tour was not going to stop us celebrating, and we wanted our family and friends with us. We paid for 20 or so people to fly out. At the time, we thought we were close to all of them. Today, none of them are in touch, with the obvious exceptions of our family, Mum and Tony, Dad and Dad's girlfriend Alison, who came into his life after his second marriage broke up. Shirley was also on a 10-week tour of America at the same time as us, and she was able to take time out to spend my birthday night with me. We hired a presidential suite at the Crescent Hotel to hold the party in, and there were smaller suites for Mum and Tony and Dad and Alison. We got a tremendous buzz out of treating them like royalty. Mum had never been to the States before, so it was really nice to be able to give her a holiday there. The whole party cost us about 25 grand, including the flights. But I had such a good time, I certainly don't begrudge it. At the time, we had no reason to believe that we weren't making loads of money. Matt and I gave each other expensive gifts. I gave him a Cartier Pasha watch with a red alligator strap, and he gave me a Cartier necklace. They each cost about £4,000. We worked ourselves stupid on the American tour. I wish all the critics back in Britain who sniped at us for being talentless and hyped could have seen us out there, in front of audience who had never heard of us and didn't want to hear from us. Dad remembers watching us perform in Dallas. He saw me come off stage with my hands streaming with blood. He was worried. He did not realise that drumming so hard always made me bleed. My hands were always a problem. Brush shows are high-energy productions with a lot of heavy rhythmical drumming. I would develop 9 or 10 blisters on my right hand and 5 or 6 on my left. My wrists would ache like crazy, and for the first few weeks of any tour, I would be in agony. The blisters would often burst, and then the blood would be splattered all over my drum kit. When Matt sang The Boys Dropped, he did it alone on stage without any instruments. So I dashed backstage where someone would have a large bowl full of ice waiting for me. I'd plunge my hands into it. It was agony, but it eventually dulled the pain enough for me to go back on stage and carry on playing. Phil Gaynor, the drummer of Simple Minds, gave me some great tips when I met him at Nomi's recording studios near Olympia. And now I take my fingers with thin gauze bandages. Over the bandages I wear golfing gloves because they are skin tight and don't limit the movements. They wear out pretty quickly, lasting about 2 shows. While we were touring America, we met the Rolling Stones. They were appearing in Kansas, and we went along to watch their gig. I didn't even know that they would ever have heard of us, but Ronnie Wood said straight away, "What are you bastards doing here?" with a big grin on his face. We played pool and table tennis backstage with him and Bill Wyman, and they asked us for signed pictures for their kids. I thought, hold on a minute, this should be the other way round. I should be asking for this. It was a very strange feeling. I think they were pleased to see another couple of English lads. It always seems odd meeting your heroes. I remember the first time I met Elton John. Elton was wearing a huge square canary diamond. I'd never seen anything like it. "Is that real?" I blurted out. "Course it is, you stupid bastard," he said with a grin. I felt so stupid, but to me it looked like something you get out of a Christmas cracker. It was so big. We got on very well with him. By the time we came back from America, our second album had been released in Britain, even though we weren't around to promote it. It sold 1.2 million copies, which is not bad at all. But it's only a third of what the first one sold. So the American tour screwed things up and was the beginning of the end of Bros. When you're young, famous and you think you're rich, you don't worry about security. You spend your money on things that give you pleasure, and you get pleasure from cars and jewellery. Neither of those are very good investments, but I enjoyed them. It's no good filling your life with regrets. Sure, if I had my time all over again, I'd do a lot of things differently. But looking back, I can see that when I bought cars and jewellery, and cars in particular, I was just living any young guy's fantasy. I'd been desperate to get mobile at the age of 17 in any old banger, and as soon as I started to earn real money, a decent car was what I wanted more than anything in the world. Because of my age and the kind of cars I loved, it cost a small fortune in insurance, $6,000 a year, but I thought it was worth it, and more to the point, I thought I could afford it. The Suzuki Jeep, the band used in the early days, was given away as a prize in a competition in the Sun. Our accountant at the time told each of us that we could spend up to $14,000 on a car, and my choice was a red Toyota MR2 T-Bar, my first real grown-up car. After the Toyota, I had a white BMW 325i. It had black windows and a white interior. It was a real beauty. Thanks to my friends in the press, I'd only had it a few minutes when I was involved in a crash which wrote off Shirley's new car and a second-hand black BMW she'd bought for herself. We were driving along the M25 after I'd picked up the cars, and we had a chauffeur-driven Jag in convoy with us. He'd driven us to the garage. I suddenly became aware that there was a car with a press photographer in it trying to get alongside me, and I remember feeling pleased because I had tinted windows, which he meant he couldn't see in. The next moment, the press car pulled suddenly in front of the Jag braked, the roads were wet, and although I was only doing 55 miles an hour, I went into the back of the Jag. Shirley piled into the back of me. £6,000 worth of damage, and my car 5 inches shorter than it was when I bought it, only half an hour earlier. To say I was upset would be an understatement. For the Too Much video, we hired a convertible Porsche for a month, and I was smitten by Porsches. I dreamed of having a Porsche ever since I'd passed my driving test, but never thought I would achieve it. After driving that one in France, I knew that I had to have one. I bought a metallic green Porsche 944, which I saw in a garage window and thought it was beautiful. I should have known better than to buy a car without testing it. It was a sluggish, and the seats were not leather, and I hated the green colour. I was a prat for buying it. The garage where we bought our cars on a regular basis agreed to buy it back, at a substantial loss to me. The next car I bought was a Porsche 911, a blue one. This time I did not even go out to buy it myself. I sent my personal assistant. I was very busy at the time and I wanted to avoid publicity. The car caused me a lot of problems. It turned out that it had been in a serious accident and then repaired, but the repairs had never been authorised by Porsche, which meant the car was worth considerably less than I had paid for it. Eventually, after legal action, I got £7,500 back. After that, I bought the car of my dreams. A red Porsche Carrera. It cost me 35 grand, but I was paying for it on the never never. It was the best car I ever owned, and I cried when it was taken away after everything collapsed around me. It was not actually repossessed. I sold it back to the garage I got it from for $5,000 less than I paid for it. But at least I had the satisfaction of knowing that I lived my dream, even if it was for a few months. The most hellish equation of all is to be famous and have no money. Money soothes away the problems that come with fame. The crowds of fans, the lack of privacy. Money buys a comfortable security that you can retreat into from the outside world, where everybody believes they own a part of you. Billy Connolly, the comedian, who's had his fair share of press spotlight, once said, "To be famous and poor would be frightening." Well, the reality is mine, and I can tell you that it is frightening. Seeing millions change hands in our name, we had been seduced into believing we were seriously rich. We geared our lifestyles to being able to afford things to make fame manageable. The bodyguards and the personal assistants, electronic security, a house away from the road. We've been accused of being extravagant. Well, I admit I did spend, but nothing like the extent that the public has been led to believe. We were rock stars, but we did not lead a rock star's life, nightclubbing and partying until dawn. And we never had drug habits to support like some people in the music business. And remember, we were very, very young. How many 18-year-olds or 19-year-olds would see their singles shoot up into the charts and not go out and buy a car, a watch, some clothes? How many teenagers would turn themselves into accountants and start checking through the balance sheets just to see how well off they really were? It was when we came back from the disastrous American tour that we decided to renegotiate our contract with our management company. It was a decision that would turn 1990 into the most traumatic of my life. Within weeks, we were advised to break off completely with our management company. And we then found ourselves launched on a bitter 5-month struggle, during which time our career, without anyone handling it properly, foundered. Our management company sued us, and eventually the case was settled out of court. We discovered that our financial affairs were in a tremendous mess. We were insolvent with debts of £300,000 without including our tax liabilities. There were creditors pressing angrily at the door, and there was no money to pay them. It looked as though as if we were going to be made bankrupt. Even though I realised things weren't right, the words bankrupt and insolvent hit me like a sledgehammer. I kept thinking I was going to wake up from a nightmare and find it had all gone away. At the back of my mind, I was half expecting the phone call to say there'd been a big mistake and we were actually doing very nicely, thank you. I could not believe all those hours, days, weeks and months of hard slog had been for absolutely nothing. In the privacy of my own home, I sobbed my heart out. I felt unclean, a failure. I felt I had done something wrong, yet all I had ever done was make pop records that had sold well. I felt I had let people down. Our new accountant David Radden sat us down and went through the mess with us. We knew that we were in serious, serious trouble. It became much worse trouble a couple of weeks later when the Sun splashed a story across the front page saying that we owed American Express £58,000. We did. They were our biggest single creditor at the time. Their debt was mainly for furnishing the house at Frimley, and we paid it off in full 2 months later. However, the damage was done and our financial problems were public. Anybody running a business will know that the worst thing that can happen is that the public lose confidence in you. From the 28th of March 1990, the date of the American Express debt story, onwards it became an open season to have a go at us over our finances. The press took every opportunity to make us out as extravagant, arrogant kids who had gone on irresponsible spending sprees. Instead of spitting at us, guys in the street would wave £5 notes at us. My one regret is, I didn't take them. We had to reveal to the High Court just how broke we were, and that made a big news story. The figures looked horrendous in cold print. We had spent £117,000 on security, £83,000 on limousines, £83,000 on travel. Anyone would think that we were holidaying it all over the world, using chauffeur-driven limousines wherever we went, and surrounded by bodyguards. There was no explanation given. The travel was the cost of touring for work. I'd only had 3 days holiday since we became famous. The limousines were used to get us to and from venues, through hordes of screaming girls, and are a part of the parcel of normal band expenditure. The bodyguards, well, I've already explained just how impossible life was when you were being besieged by fans. As for clothes, in 18 months we had paid out £164,000, but we were appearing on stage. There were 3 of us for much of the 18 months. We had to buy outfits for the rest of the band and the backing vocalist. I think if you look at the clothes expenditure of other music stars, you would find that ours was not excessive. None of this was explained. Just printing the figures made us look like we had the good sense of a cabbage. The net result of publicity was that we were crazy spendthrifts. It was an awful time for me. Instead of making music, which is all I ever wanted to do, I was spending days meeting after meeting after meeting with accountants and lawyers. Our debts continued to mount, and we were unable to work. We could not tour because there was no record to promote, and because we were tied up in London with the legal negotiations. I literally could not afford to put petrol into my car. Against this background, Matt and I were trying to write new material for an album, to find ourselves new management. That we survived that year at all is in no small way thanks to David Revden, who became a close personal friend as well as our business saviour. I'm now very cynical about people. I wish I wasn't. I wish I didn't have to be. I wish I could recapture the feelings of trust and friendship I started out with. But the minute success deserted us, so did a great many of the people we thought were friends. The phone stopped ringing. The mates who had hung out with us on the road were nowhere to be seen. Today, I do not have one friend I made during the fame days. And we lost other things as well as friendships. During those mad years, our property was treated with casual disregard by people around us, and thousands of pounds worth went missing. The 21st birthday present that Matt and I gave each other were both casualties of our own and other people's carelessness. I took my car to the chain off for a video shoot and left it to the side in the studio. After the shoot, I forgot to pick it up, but I remembered as soon as I got home, phoned the studio, and it had vanished. Matt's watch went in similar circumstances. Jackets would disappear regularly, and they would never be worth less than £500 or £600. I had a special jacket made, covered with watches and clock faces, which I wore when I was photographed for the Time album. It had the time written in studs on the back, and a watch face depicted in studs. It went. We tried to track things down, but we were so busy on the move, there were always more important things to do. My loneliness on tour, away from Shirley, was my biggest enemy. I liked having people around. It was fun. It made life more bearable. So after a show, we'd all go out to dinner together, often as many as 12 people. Anyone who was around from the tour was free to come, and they did. Whenever the bill was presented, everyone would avert their eyes and suddenly be very busy talking to their neighbour. Nobody would look at me. It was as though I was the camera, and they all wanted to avoid looking into the lens. I admit I developed a taste for good wine and good food in those days, and so did everybody else. But at least I was doing it at my own expense. Looking back, I don't know whether all these people really were playing me for a sucker, or if they, like me, genuinely felt there was so much money washing about that one more expensive meal really didn't matter. All I do know is that since the bubble burst, not one of them has been in touch. One minute you smell of roses, people can't get enough of you. The next minute you smell of dead fish and nobody wants to be around. I didn't rate money so highly enough to imagine that it was the motivation for people hanging out with me. Now, I'm afraid I believe it was. I'm a cynic now. I learned the hard way. I was buying friendship, and it wasn't worth the price I was paying for it. Not the financial price, but the emotional one. The pain of finding out that that was all that people wanted me for went very, very deep. You never really know who your friends are until you can give them nothing. There were lots of people on our payroll. When we stopped paying in the wages, the friendships stopped too. Shirley had to put her own career on the back burner while Bros were big. It was difficult for her to work. I was very bad news for her career. People in the business knew that she was with me, and they were reluctant to employ her because of our lack of credibility, or they assumed she wasn't available and didn't bother asking. So when the bubble burst, it was hard for her simply to resume her career where she left off. Our day-to-day living changed radically. David Revden put us on an allowance of £300 a week, which may sound a lot to many people, and I'm not complaining. But I do know that it's harder to set your sights down financially than it is to set them up. If you creep up to £300 a week, it seems like a lot of money. If you come down to it, from literally thinking that you are a millionaire, it seems a very small amount to manage on. And we are not used to watching pennies. Luckily, Shirley's not the sort of woman that thinks love is something that goes with diamond rings, expensive dinners and £50 bottles of perfume. She's had all those things. I know she enjoys them. But when the good times stopped rolling, she never for one moment approached me, never complained, never made me feel in any way that I'd failed her. Mum and Tony and Dad were terrific throughout the bad times. There was never any element of "I told you so" or "why didn't you listen to us." Mum was proud that we held our heads up in public and did our crying in private. We had a very difficult year, but it ended on a good note for us because John Reed, Elton John's manager, agreed to take us on. John lives in great style in a mansion near Rickmansworth in Hertfordshire. We were invited to spend the weekend with him soon after he signed us, and we were welcomed warmly. We were staggered by the obvious wealth around us. At one point he opened his safe to show us an astonishing array of Rolex watches and diamond jewellery. On our second night there he held a dinner party. In the middle of the table was a diamond-studded tortoise. And when you pressed its tail, a bell rang, summoning the staff. John's wealthy guests loved it and kept pressing the tail for the hell of it. John himself was charming. He lent his own car to us for a day. Matt, his favourite, was given a Bentley convertible, and Shirley and I were given a Merc 500 SL two-seater. He didn't know it, but I much preferred the car I got. And Matt would have too, even though the one he was driving was worth about £130,000. On our return, we went to our bedrooms. We found presents laid out for us. Shirley got a pair of silk pyjamas, and I got a pair of cotton Y-fronts with John Reed embroidered on them. Matt's girlfriend Mel got a cushion and a beautiful scarf and a pair of shorts. And Matt was given a John Paul Gaultier jacket plus a pair of pants. The jacket could have not cost less than £600. If there was a message there, it was pretty blatant. It was so blunt and obvious that I really do wonder to this day whether or not it was a mistake, although there was no doubt that John preferred Matt to me. At the same time, I find it hard to believe that he would be crude enough to show it like that. Matt was embarrassed and upset because he thought that I minded, but in fact it struck me as being funny. I've heard about people dropping hints, but this was hurling them. It didn't work out, having John's company as our managers. They're a brilliant organisation for the big stars they handle, but we needed something else. Our career was a headache, but given the right tablets, a headache goes away. Unfortunately, they didn't know what tablets to prescribe. The third album, Changing Faces, should have been the answer to all our financial problems, and launched properly and quickly with good promotion. It would have made money for our record company. It would have cleared the debts, it would have given us a future career, and, most important of all, it would have taken us across a very different bridge from prepubescent pop to the grown-up world of real music, because it was a great album and much the best thing Bros had ever done. The third album for any band is always the crucial one. It needs as much care and attention as the debut one. We were older, more experienced, and it was reflected in our songs and our music. Our musical competence had grown, and so had our musical confidence, despite all the knocks we'd had suffered. We were ready to move on. It was as if we'd been driving down an A-road and needed to get onto the motorway. The third album was going to be the slip road. We did not want to stay locked into the fantasies of little girls forever. We'd always been criticised for being pop. This album was the answer to our critics. But nobody wants to buy a record they don't know about, and nobody knew about Changing Faces. It took so long to release that all the impetus of our previous successes had been dissipated by the anti-Bros feeling whipped up by the press. We were pinning a lot of hopes on the album, but we were in for a big, big disappointment. It just didn't happen. It took a while for it to sink into my brain. We'd been working on the album for so long, we were very proud of it, and we knew everything that hinged on it. It was so hard to accept that it had failed. I woke up one day and realised I had nothing to look forward to. I was in debt to the tune of $250,000. There was very little work lined up, no means of ever getting the money to pay off the debts. I also knew that as far as anyone in the music business was concerned, whatever credibility Bros had belonged to Matt. Nobody had ever given me any credit. I'd never thought about Bros breaking up. Even when Matt and I talked about the different things we wanted to do musically, I always thought Bros would be there in the background. But now I could see the impossibility of it all. Despite all the subtle ways it had been suggested to him, I knew that Matt would never make the decision. He would have been worried about leaving me. And it riled me to think that anyone would worry about me, because I'm proud and capable. But I could see that Matt, who has a great voice, would never get the recognition he deserved while we were in Bros, and identified only with our team fans. I didn't want him to grow up to feel resentful about me. I knew it had to come from me. It was a sudden decision, made when I woke up one morning. I'm glad I didn't agonise over it for a long time. It's hard to give up something secure, something that works. It's a bit like giving your house away. But the Bros house was leaking and drafty, and although it was a roof over my head, I didn't feel I had the energy left to repair it. I finally knew that Bros had reached the end of the road. I picked up the telephone and called Matt. He'd probably not admit it, but I think Matt's main emotion when I told him I was leaving Bros was one of relief. He'd been told for so long or by so many people that he was a talent in the band, and I was holding him back from a brilliant solo career. Ultimately, he would have found it hard to resist believing at least some of it. I realised after we split that I'd spent 5 years playing second fiddle to him, never promoting myself and my involvement strongly enough. It was a real reversal of roles we had had for the first 18 years, when I was the dominant one, the one with the will and the determination to get the band together. And he was my little brother Maffey. But I was still that same strong personality. It simply took me a few painful months to get back to knowing it. I don't think Matt could take it in at first, and then he cried, which made me cry too. After speaking to him, I called John Reed's company, and then the record company. Within a week I'd become organisation free. I'd gone from having managers, a record company, a publishing company, and a partnership with my brother, to having nothing. For a day or two there was a phony feeling of elation, of being D-Mob happy. Then it hit me. I knew that if we went bankrupt, my bungalow would be repossessed, and I could not bear being there when that happened, so Shirley, Carly and I moved into a rented house. That Christmas was a very strange time, very special and very precious, as though we were trapped in a tiny capsule of happiness before being thrust into the pain and reality of what was happening to us. For a week or two, the whole nation is on holiday, and so it did not matter that I wasn't working. My family and Shirley's family came to stay with us. It was painful for me only being able to buy token presents. When you're used to being able to spoil those around you, it takes a lot of psychological bending to accept that you can't. But we all had a great time anyway. Everyone got on brilliantly. Mum and Shirley are now very close, and Mum and Tony adore Carly, and I love Shirley's mum and the rest of her family. The only tension over the whole holiday was between Matt and me. We knew that just after Christmas Matt was leaving the country to work in America. It would be the first time we had ever been apart for a long stretch of time. In the event, we did not see each other for a year. We knew the parting was necessary, but neither of us were very good at handling the pain we were in. Matt and I have always loved each other, but it was as though other people had put a panel of misty glass between us, and we could not always see each other properly, or reach out and touch each other properly. Our frustrations spilled over into a really nasty row, with us each shoving the other, and saying things afterwards regretted. I expect other twins are the only people who will understand how close you are to someone who has shared your life from birth. It is a bond that sometimes, like that Christmas Eve, is too strong to handle. When the moment came for him to leave, we both broke down completely. We were crying and holding each other, tears running down both our faces. It seemed so big, so final. The only words we said to each other over and over were, "Love you, love you." I was grateful then that, as a family, we've never been frightened of showing our emotions and expressing our love. It would have been dreadful if partner had been a macho slapping on the back and fighting back the tears. At least we were able to let it all out. We clung together, reluctant to accept it was happening, and yet both realising it was inevitable. When Matt eventually climbed into his car, he wound down the window, and I walked alongside with him, down the drive to open the gate for him. His last words were, "Luke, I'll always love you." As his car pulled away, I could not watch. I was blinded by my own tears, and I stood for a moment at the gate, looking down, struggling to control myself. Then, as I lifted my head, I saw a bright light streak across the night sky. It was a shooting star. I made a wish for health, happiness for both of us. It sounds so corny, but I'm sure that star was an omen. I was incredibly lonely and scared when Matt went away. We'd been together all our lives, and we'd worked together from the day we left school. I felt almost as though I'd had a part of my own body amputated. In the months after he left, I went through what was probably a nervous breakdown. But I did it on my own, and I came through without any professional help. I'm a very proud person, and it's hard for me to describe and even accept what happened to me in these months. My life had become a negative of itself in half a decade. The first 3 years of my career was a positive image, the next 2 were negative of the same picture. Instead of being lauded and having people hang on every word, I felt I was a complete nothing, worthless. Instead of having money, I was poor and in debt. Instead of having friends, I was alone. Acclimatising to loneliness is very hard. I became very, very afraid. I was afraid to go outside, afraid to see anybody. I thought people would say things, would think I looked poor or ugly. I was afraid that if I spoke, they'd tell me off or say hurtful things. I was one big walking insecurity. I looked terrible. The hair on the top of my head came out in clumps. Thankfully, it has regrown. My skin was blotchy. I lost weight, dropping from over 11 stone to 9.5 stone. Worse, I lost interest. I can remember looking in the mirror one morning and had not shaved for about 4 days. I was bleary-eyed from drinking too much the day before, and I was wearing a tracksuit, trainers and no socks. I thought, what have you become? The worst moment of every day was the morning when I first woke up. It would take me a few seconds for me to remember, I've lost my home, I've lost my car, I have £250,000, I can't go out, I can't support myself or my family, I'm a failure. The debt felt like a great heavy bag tied to my ankles, stopping me from walking. For 8 months I hardly went out. The rented house had leaded lights at the windows, and I remember standing at the windows watching the rain driving across the garden and feeling that I was behind bars, a prisoner. At times like that, I sometimes had such severe anxiety attacks that I would hyperventilate and start to shake. At other times I would cry. I'd collapse on the floor and give way to huge, uncontrollable sobs. Sometimes I would be full of resentment, pacing about like Mr. Angry. And on other days I would have no energy and talk in a flat monotone. There'd be fans outside the gate. The number had dwindled to a small knot by now. But in the early days of the split, there were never less than 30 or 40 girls there. I would wander around in the bathrobe or sling on a tracksuit. There seemed no point for dressing up to stay at home, but with the girls at the gate, I could not, on the point of pride, walk out looking terrible. I was trapped, living like a hermit. One day I realised that it was 3 weeks since I'd even been outside the front door of the house. I had to force myself to go into the garden. I got out of my chair and I was aching everywhere. I felt so low and lacking in energy, but I did it. And then I started crying again because I realised how pathetic I was becoming. I started drinking. I was having a beer at 10 a.m. just to quench my thirst, even though a soft drink or a cup of tea would have done that. Then I had a few more beers at lunchtime, and in the evening I'd drink a bottle of wine or two. I'd wake up every morning feeling slightly hungover, slightly off colour. I was frightened of answering the phone. Every call seemed to bring more bad news. Eventually the bungalow was repossessed, and the press reacted with great glee. But I was in the same situation as thousands of other families in Britain during the recession. I'd paid a lot of money for my house that was now worth much less, and I couldn't afford the repayments on it. We had to sell everything of value to survive. My stuff went first. My car, and then my jewellery, then Shirley's car, and even the 2.5-carat diamond ring that I'd given to Shirley, telling her how much I loved her when I handed it over to her. The first watch I sold raised enough money to buy the very basic recording equipment I needed. The Ford Granada that Matt and I had jointly bought for Mum and Tony was the only thing we did not sell. I knew from the moment that we'd split that Matt would have an easier time than me. He was out of the country and away from all the hostile publicity. He managed to get new management and a recording contract straight away, and his private life is now settled with his girlfriend Mel. I did envy him, but I knew I had to fight back on my own and find my own salvation. I was saved from a complete breakdown by work. I knew I could write songs, I knew I could sing, and I knew I could play. If I'd been all the things people thought I was talentless, hyped, dependent on my brother for success. Sure, I probably would have gone under, ended up in therapy, a head case. But the bottom line was that I never lost faith in myself. My faith was shaken, it came close to being obliterated, but it was always there. I was moping in bed one day and Shirley literally kicked me out, took hold of my last watch and ordered me to sell it and buy some more equipment. It was the jolt I needed, and I bought some more equipment, a keyboard and a small studio. Working was hard at first because I had always worked with Matt before, right back when we composed songs together in the summer house. But I taught myself how to use the computer and I got to work, and I soon discovered I enjoyed it. I put my head down and got on with it. I've got to get it right was like a one-track plan in my brain, keeping me at the keyboard long after the rest of the world had gone to bed. I'd start work at about 1 p.m. and I'd still be going at about 4 a.m. I'm an insomniac at the best of the times. At the worst of times, sleep becomes my enemy. I don't want the bad dreams. I don't want the horrible experiences of waking up and remembering all over again the mess my life was in. Shirley helped me with my singing. I lacked confidence at first. I was not sure whether it sounded right. I told her not to pull punches, but to tell me if I was awful. And she was a tough critic. I used to wake up in the morning coughing up blood. I panicked the first time, but Shirley explained it was my throat bleeding because I'd been singing for 6 or 8 hours the night before. Once I had got 4 good demo tracks together, not professionally produced in an expensive studio, but made at my own home on my own equipment, I set out to find myself a new manager. It was a struggle as far as people in the business were concerned. My experience counted for nothing. When you just play drums on stage, people think that's all you can do, and in my case, they thought I didn't even do that. In reality, I co-wrote and co-produced the songs. I may have done Wembley Stadium, I may have toured the world, I may have done hundreds of TV shows, and I may have still had a fan following and 12 hit singles. But I was like a complete newcomer when it came to finding new management. For some reason, people think that when you lose your money, you lose your experience. They patronise you as though everything, including your brains, disappear with the cash. It took me 8 months altogether to find new management, and during that time I felt I was a voice crying in the wilderness. I not only had to swallow my pride, but digest it and get rid of it, to bring myself to walk around the offices of management companies trying to sell myself. Now everything's in place, and I'm really looking forward to my new career in music. I tell Shirley that I had her when I had everything, money, fame and a successful career, and I have her now, so I'll never be poor. I don't have to make any payments on her. She's there, and I want her to know how much I love her. Without her, I would have been like a big cornfield stripped by locusts. There would be nothing left of me worth having. She's been so supportive. At times she's cried with me, at times she has pleaded with me, and at times she's been so tough with me. But at no point has she reproached me. She has seen me grow from a boy to a man in the time she has known me, and she tells me that she believes I have been dignified and brave. She doesn't tell me in an ego-stroking way. She tells me because she's seen me contain myself. When it would have been so easy for me to thump someone, or she's seen me struggle on with my work when it would have been so easy for me to throw in the towel. Our love has grown very much stronger through the last 2 years. We have spent so much more time together, which would have been disastrous if there had not been a really deep bond already there. If there were any cracks in our relationship, the trials we have been through would have opened them up wide. I have grown much closer to Carly. She's comfortable with me now, and I love having her about. Relationships that have a few problems in the early days usually work out to be stronger than those who start out high. Carly and I have both learned to make concessions to each other. Shirley and I have been together now for more than 20% of my life, and the only grown-up portion of it. I missed a bit of my youth by meeting Shirley so young, but youth contains nothing that I care about. All that happens when you are young is that you make a lot of mistakes, and I've had my fair share of those in other ways. Having come through the last 2 years, I am now a very strong person. I have learned the power of positive thinking. I refuse to dwell on the negative aspects of my life. I wake up in the morning and think about what I've got going for me, not what's against me. The only luxury that I want today is security. The security to wake up in my own home, surrounded by my own family, and the security of doing a job that I love. Once success meant a Porsche Carrera or Mercedes on the drive and a gold Rolex on my wrist, but now I know they were shallow trappings of fame. I would of course like to be successful again. I intend to be. But there is a fine line between fame and success. Last time round I had fame, but I did not have true professional success. This time I'm in to reverse the equation. I want the success, the respect, the career that my music deserves. Whether or not I have the fame is incidental. It would be hard now to ever be completely anonymous, and I accept that. But I will never again be excited by fame. I don't have any regrets. If I made some mistakes, then at least they were honest mistakes, and I made them at my own expense, nobody else's. When I first became famous, I felt I owed a great deal to the fans who bought my records, screamed at my concerts, made me a star. Someone said to me recently, "You owe everything to them." They gave you everything you had. It's taken me a long time to realise I don't owe them anything. They had a good time. They got pleasure from my records. That's why they were buying them. They weren't buying me. The only debts I have are financial. I've paid all my other dues. I hope that those of you who have listened to this story have enjoyed it, and I hope that you have come to see me as a human being, not the two-dimensional brusque clone that I was made out to be. But at the end of it, that's all I'm giving of myself to anyone. I don't belong to you any more than you belong to me. I owe you nothing.